the first debate is what's the best approach in the early rounds of a dynasty startup, and specifically in Superflex. So in our draft here, there definitely was a lot of wide receivers early in the first round, no doubt about it. But there was also obviously a lot of quarterbacks. The first 6 picks, 5 of them were quarterbacks. So when Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson to you, Danny Kelly took a wide receiver, Jamar Chase over Joe Burrow and Jalen Hurts. I took Burrow at 5. I felt a little conflicted about that, but I just went ahead and did it because I didn't think I was going to be ahead on a quarterback run later, which I was totally right about. I probably would have hated myself if I didn't have a quarterback in round 2. So I do think obviously we know the 3 elite quarterbacks in redraft obviously are super valuable, but we of course know like these other guys too that are first round picks. Like you can lock down that QB1 spot for a long time.
Yeah, I was really happy to have one of the top 3 picks because it took all the stress out of that first pick out of my hands. I was just going to take whichever one of those elite quarterbacks was going to fall to me. And in this case, I mean, I got Lamar coming off that season where he had, I believe it was 3 more fantasy points per game, more than any other quarterback. He's, averaged over 20 fantasy points per game for like 7 straight years. It's a pretty easy pick to take there in the first round and know in a super flex league that you get to rely on having Lamar in your lineup week in and week out. And it's funny because I feel like when I was on this show the last time talking about a redraft mock that I was preaching, going RB heavy. And I was saying like this year, especially, I want to have 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds. I like my build so much better that way in redraft for 2025. And yet then you come to a dynasty draft and it's like, I almost want to stay away from running backs early. Now, my plan changed a little bit as we went based on the players that were available. But early on, like I was saying, I want to go QB. I want to go receiver. To me, it's not really about running back. If you get one of the young guys who looks like he could have, several years of quality production for you, that's fine. And there's a couple that went in the late first round here in Bijan and Ashton Genty. But really, you can fill your running back spots with some veteran guys. And there are some decent veterans that went very, very late in this draft. I mean, you look at like Christian McCaffrey going in the 6th round, Derrick Henry going in the 8th round. If you load up on those young receivers, if you get yourself a couple good quarterbacks early, and then you turn around and get some of that level of running back later in the draft, your starting lineup is going to look very solid in year 1. I think there's a few teams that did a really good job of that in this one.
Yeah, I don't that's kind of what I wanted to do. I typically, for me in the early rounds of drafts, like I do want to hammer quarterback, wide receiver in a super flex format. No question about it. I came away with 3 receivers that I really love in the first 5 rounds. I went Nico Collins in round 2, then Chris Olave and Emeka Egbuka in the 5th round. So I didn't get my second quarterback until a little bit later, which we can come back to that part of it. But I only went with 1 running back in the first 5 rounds, which is what I typically tend to do. I got Amari and Hampton, and I'm kind of just like, listen, I'll figure out that second round, that second running back spot somewhere along the way. Ended up being James Conner in round 10, which I might only have like maybe 1 to 1.5 more good years left with our guy James Conner here, but I can figure that out next year. Like, let's try to find running backs in the rookie draft. We only drafted 12 rounds, so I only took another running back later, which was Dylan Sampson, look, Dylan Sampson might start for the damn Browns this year. I don't know if you saw this, but Jimmy Haslam, the Browns owner, said he was cautiously optimistic that Quinshon Judkins would play for the team. I'm like, you're caught. Like I know obviously there's a serious domestic violence situation with him right now, obviously, but it's like, you're cautiously optimistic your second round pick is going to play for you. I mean, that's not glowing, okay? Like that. All that said to me was Dylan Sampson's going to start games for the Browns this year. So again, that's sort of what I mean by trying to piece that second running back spot together, because there's just so few cornerstones at that position right now. I mean, Ashton Genty, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs went in the top of the second round, but I mean, dude, almost everybody at the running back position, if we're looking even just 2 years down the road, I mean, you just never know what's going to happen at that position.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that you got Hampton in that spot. I considered him in the 3rd round here. But again, because I normally go the other way with my build, I decided, you know what, I'll wait a little bit longer on running back. Turns out I only waited 1 more round before I took a running back, but I got Bucky Irving there, who I thought was a pretty good value. He fell about a round later than where he normally goes in dynasty startups. But I went with Hampton's teammate in Justin Herbert. And man, what like an amazing core the Chargers have in terms of like pretty young talent. Like Herbert's 27. The other guy's even younger than that. And we see Ladd McConkey, we see Herbert, and we see Hampton all go within like 7 picks at that round 2-3 turn. I would have liked to have any of them there. I ended up taking Herbert as my QB2 and really kind of solidifying that position. Now I have 2 quarterbacks that I know are going to be on my roster for a long time. I'm not going to have to worry about arguably the most important position in a super flex league. And then between that, I took Drake London. And I don't know if I've ever heard your take on Drake London, but man, to get a 24-year-old receiver, a guy who's, coming off this breakout year, who before last year had terrible quarterback play, and then last year gets decent quarterback play and explodes, right? Has a ton of volume, a ton of production. That season finished 5th among PPR fantasy wideouts. He's behind only Chase, Jefferson, St. Brown, and Brian Thomas. Like, what a year for him. He was 6th in targets per game on the year. And when they turned to Michael Penix at the end of the season for those last 3 games, he was actually tied. London was tied for the number 1 fantasy wideout during those 3 weeks. He was averaging 23.1 PPR fantasy points per game. So I think, again, this is not, guaranteed to happen. This is not even likely. It is a long shot. But I think he's a guy that people aren't talking enough about as somebody that could potentially push for that number 1 receiver spot overall. Like, this guy could lead the league in targets this year. That is not a crazy thing to say in my mind. So again, it's within his range of outcomes. I don't think it's going to happen, but to get a 24-year-old receiver like that in the second round, that solidifies my number 1 receiver spot. I was really happy to have that sandwich of the 2 really good QBs with him in between.
I think we're going to have a section later on the show called the players with the best path to becoming a first-round dynasty pick in 2026. Drake London is obviously among that group. And you mentioned, like, I agree with you. He is my buddy James Coates says this often, that he might have had like the quietest near 1,300 yard season in NFL history. And I do think in fairness, some of it is because he just pumped up that final production line in week 18, when obviously most people are not playing fantasy anymore. And it was just, but listen, like the other team on the other side, the Panthers, it's not like they were just calling it quits at that point. Like Bryce Young also played great in that game. One of the reasons that like we're excited about Bryce Young potentially is how he played in that week 18 against the Falcons. In fairness, both those 2 teams, not good defenses. So it was kind of like a wild, shootout between two young quarterbacks that were playing very aggressive football last year. But still, like, you don't just get to nearly 1,300 yards because you cut up one team in week 18. The guy was awesome all season long. If Michael Penix is 18th best quarterback in the league, like, yeah, he could easily be a consensus first round startup pick in Drake London. Frankly, like, I don't know, he maybe he should already be there. I think that the fact that he got him or that he went here in the you got him in the late or second round, that's great value, because this is where I think, Boone, people jump the shark with the age stuff. Like, I think basically on most dynasty rankings, Drake London is behind Neighbors, who went in the first round here. He's behind Brian Thomas Jr., who did go in the second round. And I'm very optimistic on he's going to come up in that could be a first round pick next year. But like, he's only 2 years older, is Drake London, than these guys. It's not as if he's some like, all right, well, he's already cooked. And there's every reason to think Drake London could be just as productive as those guys for the next 3 or so years. So yeah, I love your inclusion of him here. He's a great football player, somebody I've been super high on as a very underrated, like, separator, basically since he came into the league out of USC. The guy is awesome, and I love the situation for him this year.
Yeah, and when you look at that offense, like Darnell Mooney, a little bit banged up right now. Will he be ready for week 1? I think so, but, he is a little bit hurt, and he's kind of the only other real option. Kyle Pitts has gotten a lot of talk. He's gotten a lot of hype again that he could be involved. Michael Penix even saying,
it's like, Kyle Pitts. It's Kyle Pitts season, baby. This is.
Did you see me throwing the KP out there? We're going to do lots of that this year, right? And then immediately the fantasy world's like, all right, we're back in. We're doing this again. And I myself still have Pitts on a bunch of teams, so I would like to see that happen. But you look at that offense, and there's just no one challenging London at the top of that target tree. So he is going to have a fantastic season for sure. I was really happy to get him, but there was a bunch of guys, right? Like I just said, Ladd McConkey, somebody else that in that range. And again, we don't want to spoil talking later about guys that could potentially be first round picks in 2026, but Ladd McConkey's somebody else that I could see rise very quickly this year if he comes out in a similar situation, right? Not having a lot of target competition with the Chargers, could come out and put up an astronomical year based on the kind of volume that he could get. So those were two picks, I think, at the end of the second round that, I was happy they were both available to me. I definitely wanted to go with London, but I would have been okay taking either guy.
Yeah, I think when I'm looking at these like early rounds too, I am a little conflicted on my approach personally to kind of punt both running back 2 and quarterback 2 in this spot because, I really like the fact that I got Joe Burrow. Really liked where I got Amari and Hampton. And I did want to hammer wide receiver. This is, again, nothing's perfect. Like you can't build a perfect team in a dynasty startup unless your guys like unless Emeka Egbuka comes out and he's like the most productive wide receiver on the Bucks, which I think there's a non-0% chance that happens. It's not the most likely scenario, but I think there's a non-0% chance it happens. And it's like, oh well, guess what? Now this looks like a great team because I've got 2 really strong wide receivers in Nico Collins and Emeka Egbuka. That's great. Or some of my later round picks really hit, like Tucker Kraft, who I took again in this draft. This was one of those situations where I took Tucker Kraft again, and I was like, you know what? I'm writing up my annual draft day blueprint. I'm like, well, one of my guys obviously is Tucker Kraft because I keep taking him in all these damn drafts. So that's just a good content decision there. He turns into a top 10 tight end. Okay, great. Then the team has outkicked its coverage or whatever. But punting on both running back and quarterback too makes it a little bit like challenge. Like I don't feel great with Bryce Young as my QB2 and Sam Darnold as my QB3, Boone. I'm curious just on your kind of thoughts of like where the cliff comes at quarterback. Cause again, there's a chance like Bryce Young, if he plays the way that he did all throughout kind of like from week 10 on last year when the Panthers were a top 15 offense in most efficiency metrics, then he probably is a great quarterback too in Superflex, but you just got to hopefully land on those right spots there to really get the value.
I honestly think the cliff doesn't come until like Geno Smith, and shout out to Chad Parsons in this one. When you're in a group like this, you said it is tough to come away with a team that you're happy with. It's even tougher when you're drafting against this level of manager, right? Like everyone in this league knows what they're doing. There were no real values that are sneaking through. The values that did get through were just kind of barely values. And Chad really took a risk. Like he went QB early. He got Patrick Mahomes. And then he waited all the way until the 9th round and he took Geno Smith. And I think that's actually like a great pick as your second quarterback. If you're able to wait that long and get a player at that level who probably isn't going to have a difference-making fantasy season for you, but can be a totally serviceable starter in that super flex spot. A guy that a few years ago showed us that he could be a top 10 fantasy quarterback. He was the QB 10 in 2022. He's dealt with some things since then, but now he's going to Vegas where he's going to have an up-tempo attack with Chip Kelly. He's going to have some great weapons around him. You have to like what they've been doing with those guys, right? Having Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers, who's super underrated as a receiver. He's going to have the weapons and a chance here to potentially put up a decent fantasy season. And when you're getting him in the range that Chad got him in, he doesn't have to be a top 10, top 12 quarterback. If he gives you top 15, top 20 numbers, you're okay because you were able to spend the rest of your early picks on other guys at other positions that are also going to be able to elevate your team, right? So I think that was a really smart move. The one that is fun, and Pat Fitzmaurice took him as his third quarterback, is Anthony Richardson, because Anthony Richardson right now, apparently in training camp, kind of outplaying Daniel Jones so far. It's very, very early, but people seem excited. The beat writers seem excited about him. And we know if Anthony Richardson ever does put this all together, the ceiling there is astronomical. And that's another team where they've surrounded him with some really good weapons. And you mentioned Josh Downs, a guy that we both like. We'll talk about what happened when you took Josh Downs. And I may or may not have messaged you immediately, even though it's a mock draft, because I was a little bit annoyed about that one. But Anthony Richardson, if he puts it all together this season, he would be a guy that should go in the top 5 or 6 rounds, maybe even higher. So taking a shot on him late as your third quarterback, where you don't have to put him in your starting lineup, I thought that was a great pick too. But I'm willing, when I looked at this, it made me question my Herbert pick because some of these quarterbacks fell a little bit later than expected. And I know in analyst drafts, that's going to happen. We talked about that with the mock draft. You see often when analysts are going up against each other, they kind of play that game of chicken where they let the quarterbacks go a little later. Sometimes they even let the tight ends go a little bit later. But we saw some of those guys fall, and I think you got a decent one in Bryce Young too, who showed us in the second half of last season that he could potentially be a decent fantasy quarterback. He can run a little bit. He was doing a little more with his legs than I think anybody expected, and all of a sudden had some good fantasy weeks. If he continues that, and I'm not sure there's any reason to think he's not going to when they go out and get McMillan as a true number one receiver for him, when they bring back a lot of their other pieces, I think Young is going to be just fine and maybe even have a breakout season. And I think this is something too that we should maybe consider with some of these quarterbacks that have new coaches this year. When you think about Caleb Williams and Drake May, who went in the second round and very early in the second round in this draft, some of these teams that have new coaches, it might take a little bit, right? Last year, I think Dave Canales showed up and we had seen what he had done with quarterbacks in other cities. And then he comes to Carolina and everybody goes, oh my God, he's going to do it. He's going to be the QB whisperer. He's going to turn it all around. And it took a while. And for a long stretch there, it didn't look like it was going to turn out. You end up having Andy Dalton come in. And then all of a sudden in the second half of the season, it starts to click. So maybe people should keep that in mind when we're thinking about what these quarterbacks like. For example, Caleb Williams, like when you see some of these highlights coming out of camp, or lowlights if you want, where he's getting picked off, where he's throwing interceptions and people are getting all over him for it on social media. This is training camp. Like this is the very early stages of him in a new system. And then today we see reports that he started to feel more confident and he's starting to look a lot better. That's going to come. So just maybe, throw a little cold water on the people that are excited about Caleb Williams and the people who are worried about it. Just remember that it might not happen in week 1. It might happen in week 4. It might happen in week 8, but I'm pretty confident those two picks are going to hit in Drake May and Caleb Williams.
Oh yeah, so am I. And we'll get to the second year quarterbacks actually in our next segment here, but just kind of closing the loop on this one. I think actually, like I said, there's going to be redraft advice like sprinkled into here. I think some of our takeaways from the redraft mock really inform the dynasty one here, which is just you can like in the seasonal league, the value between like, what do we say, QB 9 to like QB 20 something is pretty flat. Well, that means that, you can come away with the pretty useful and like maybe not great, but maybe useful quarterback 2, quarterback 3 in a Superflex dynasty format like this one. You mentioned some of the just really fascinating QB2 options that went in this draft here. And same thing at the running back position. Like if you do want to punt running draft, like I said, maybe I don't want to do 2, like both of those every single draft, but I did kind of do it here because there's so much, like there's some veteran sort of depth in that is getting pushed up in seasonal draft, but getting pushed down in dynasty. You can sort of take advantage of